This post is about silty sponge ledges out in the Isles of Scilly and other places. This is the Isles of Scilly, and there's some multitasking going on here. Controlling my buoyancy, watching me buddy, looking at my depth, unlimbering the camera and also the video and the lights, which have just been turned on. And here you can see a great big wall, and it's grazed with urchins and Holothurian sea cucumbers. And it goes down a long way. That plateau you see at the bottom, with a little pocket of silt, is down at 30 metres, and it goes far beyond that. Don't worry, you can't fall. We're diving twin sevens here, each of which is plumbed into a different source of buoyancy. So moving gradually and gently down, you see that you've got different species here than you have on the verticals. You can't really see it on this clip, you'll see it later on this video, but the verticals are covered in jewel anemones, which are absolutely spectacular. But down here, where we can't actually go because we're on air and we're out in the Scillies and there's no decompression chamber until you get onto the mainland, we've got these horizontals which are covered in fine silt, which basically drizzles out of the water column in fine weather. And when the weather's a little bit rough, or there's a current running, or both, it gets gradually scooted off down into deeper water. And here you can see, looking back up in this gully, you've got these areas where the silt collects before whistling off down into deeper water. And this silt is, of course, if not actually a veneer, it's certainly veneer influence. It influences the community, and it suffocates out some species such as the jewel anemones, which like it really clean and nice. And here we're having a little quick look at the silt, see what it's like. And you can see a Holothurian Scilly, grazing sea cucumber. Looks like a giant jobby, doesn't it? And you can see its jobby's just on the right, at the edge of the light there. And we'll move the light and get that a bit better. And you can see the material is really, really fine. This all snows out of the water column and comes off the wall as a result of grazing, browsing and predation. So it's little bits of biogenic fragments as well as silt coming out of the water column. And you see another site. This is the Chains Wreck site, and you see again these horizontals, different species to the verticals. Here you can just about see tiny verticals with jewel anemones on. You can see one running across the middle of the frame now. You can see the jewel anemones are different colours, and the horizontals with a little bit more sediment have different species. There's hydroids and bryozoans and sponges. Moving down a little bit deeper in a moment, past this jewel anemone wall. This is the same site, different lip. You can see you've got this little pocket which is in current shadow. You've got all these different sponges, and there's red dead men's fingers on the wall there. And here we go, moving up, you can see what the overhang is, coming into focus now. This is why it's called the Chains site. You've got these enormous lengths of huge anchor chain. My hands would just about span the width of the links of this chain here, and there's lots and lots and lots of it. And it's got all different things on it. It's very difficult to see unless you've got your eye in. There's a pentapora, a potato crisp bryozoan. I call it a Ross coral because I'm old, sitting on top of it, so it's been there a long time. You see jewel anemones on the wall and an urchin. Urchin is another grazer. And moving round the corner, a little bit down, round to the current now, you can see a pink sea fan. And this area here has more sponges and of course more silt. Sponges don't seem to mind a bit of silt. Bear in mind that in really rough weather, say in the winter, much of this silt might go, but none of us would be ever here to see that, because we wouldn't be able to survive when the water's really moving. And you can can see all the different species. Isn't that lovely? Quite easy to overlook these in favour of the really nice jewel anemone encrusted walls. Also, frustratingly, it's difficult to spend time down here. This is one of the species, Axinella infundibuliformis. It's a cup sponge. And this is Homaxinella subdola, with its sort of pointy branch tips. It's very, very velvety, bright yellow coloration, and it's quite stiff stalk that you can see at the bottom, which is narrow diameter. This is Parazoanthus axinelli, a cluster anemone, which seems often to get its start on another axinellid sponge, yellow, called Axinella damicornis, which looks a bit like a crumpled yellow duster. And this is just moving on. Here we can see a pink sea fan. Don't know what it's sitting up on, but it's not on the rock. And in behind it there is red sea fingers, the Alcyonium glomeratum, and a white pink sea fan, a slightly rarer white version. And then moving over towards the drop off again, you can see that this habitat carries on, and this is just down the other side of that same drop off. And here you can see a great lump of red deadman's fingers, and then white deadman's fingers down to the right, and more sponges on the siltier bits. And up on the wall we've got more Corinactis, which is the jewel anemones, more red deadman's fingers, and if the camera will pan round to the right again, down here in the siltier bit you've got sponges again, with baked bean squirt Stylonica socialis on this little wall here, and there's a red alga above that polymastia sponge. And even down here close to 30 metres in the Scillies you've got red algae, whereas on the Dorset coasts they'd have disappeared long since. Coming up on the right, beyond this red deadman's fingers, we've got these tall, almost stately hydroids, very slender, very fine, that catch the silt. We'll see those in a moment. And on the left you've got Axinella damicornis, which the Parazoanthus cluster anemone gets its start on. Down in that little gully there we've got an edible urchin, which obviously has fallen off the wall for some reason and is lying on its side. And just above it, that white material, that's from those grazing cucumbers we saw earlier, also known as a cotton spinner, Holothurium forscali. They emit those if they're abused in any way, so I don't know what's caused that. And this is that hydroid I mentioned earlier, Lytocarpia myriophyllum. This still doesn't really do it justice. This is another hydroid, Polyplumeria flabellata, which if you watch the video again you'll see in places. Both of these are uncommon, not really known at all in Dorset. This is another one of those lovely flats, silty sponge sites, and the buff sponges with the aperture in the centre, the oscule, that's Subarites carnosus. And on the left here, coming up, you've been seeing these big yellow sponges throughout this dive. Those are the boring sponge, Clionus salata. Down here in Scilly, very probably doesn't do any boring at all, because the rock here is granite, which is very, very hard and very resistant. It's known to bore by chemical action. Coming up very gradually and very slowly, chasing up our no deco time, and getting into slightly shallower water, and we're starting to see a few more red algae and the very deepest of the brown algae. And this is looking down about sort of 8 or 9 meters down into a hollow, and here's my buddy, and he's illuminating an upward facing section of rock which is out in the current more, so slightly less silty, and that's got a lot of algae on it, brown algae and red algae, all different species. We're moving up into the infralittoral now. Down in the circulittoral, we're looking back down onto that now. The siltiness of the sponge ledges and the differentiation in the habitat from the walls is much clearer. Up in the infralittoral there's much more frequent disturbance, so the siltiness is still there on many sites, but it's not so easy to find these really nice veneer habitats with all these sponges. And here we have, in the infralittoral, we've just come out to the bottom of the kelp zone now. We've got more algae, different species, browns and reds. And just coming up now, the bottom of the kelp zone, we're into kelp park. The kelp forest and kelp park below it are a different story that's well covered by other people elsewhere. This video is concerned with the diverse and rather beautiful community on upward facing rock and ledges in the circulittoral in Scilly. These deep niches are less frequently subject to wave action than sites in the infralittoral, and so very fine sediment and organic matter that snows down out of these nutrient rich waters in calm weather can accumulate to form a veneer. The veneer blankets the rock and excludes less tolerant species, and is an important factor in producing the rich community dominated by long-lived sponges that this video hopes to show. It's frustrating that lack of time at this depth and the difficulty of getting to Scilly in the first place means that more in-depth look at these species on these sites has not been possible. What is known is that there are some uncommon species here, including Rhodophilus urvinorum, an alga, Zabella decifera, Homaxinellus subdola, Parazoanthus axinelli, anomalous polymastia sponges, including possible new species, uncommon hydroids and rarely recorded tunicates. Comments, as usual, are welcome. Thank you very much for watching.